Two names get thrown around every time Fromville comes up. The man in yellow, the boy in white. Half the fandom picks yellow, half picks white, and the argument is always the same. Which one's secretly worse? I used to be in that argument too. Then I went back through every season with one specific question in mind. Not who's the villain, but who actually makes the rules everyone's following. And the answer isn't either of them. Something else runs that town. Something both of them answer to. Something that's been giving out instructions since the moment Jim first picked up that radio in Season 1. And if you don't clock what it is before Season 5, you're going to watch the entire final season and miss who's actually been in charge the whole time. So let's start with the radio, because that's where this whole thing clicked for me. End of Season 1, Jim's on the roof trying to reach the outside world, and a voice answers him. Not static, not garbled, his actual name. And it tells him one thing. Stop Tabitha from digging in that basement, or something terrible happens. Everyone treats that line as a threat. But if it was just a threat, we've been misreading the scariest moment of Season 1 for 4 years. And that matters, because that same line comes back to end Season 3. Tabitha doesn't stop, obviously. She never does. She breaks through the concrete and drops straight into the tunnels under the town. The same tunnels Victor's been stuck in for decades. And 3 seasons later, we find out exactly who was on that radio. The Season 3 finale gives him a face. The man in yellow, standing over Jim, repeating almost word for word what he said in Season 1. Your wife shouldn't have dug that hole. Same warning, years apart, and I know what you're thinking. Okay, so he's obsessed with one hole, so what? But watch what he actually does with the line. He doesn't lash out at Tabitha for the digging itself. He states the consequence like he's reading it off a sheet and then he leaves. That's the tell. A monster that wanted Tabitha punished for digging would have come for Tabitha. This one goes after Jim years later and delivers the exact same sentence word for word, like he's citing a rule that was broken rather than settling a score. Digging into the tunnels through an entry point nobody sanctioned isn't a personal offense to the man in yellow. It's breaking something he answers to as well. Now here's where it gets physical, because this next part is about the talismans, and it changes what those rocks are actually doing. We all know the rule. Nail one up, the creatures can't get in. Simple. Except think about it from the creature's side for a second, because nobody ever does, and that's the gap this theory lives in. When Smiley's standing outside a door with a talisman on it, what does he actually see? Not a wall of light. Not some glowing barrier stretched across the frame. The door's still just a door. The window's still wood and glass, same as it's always been. There's no visual force field in this show. The effects team never gives us one. Which means whatever's stopping him isn't a shield at all. It's an agreement. A line he doesn't cross because something worse happens if he does. Not because there's physically anything in his way. That's a completely different kind of horror than magic rock repels monster. It means the protection was never in the stone. The stone is just a marker, a flag planted to say, this space is under the rule. And a rule only works if something enforces it. Not the rock, something else. Which brings me to the piece of this theory that actually convinced me. What happens to that hole after Tabitha digs it? This is the part everyone skips past, and it's the part that decides whether the man in yellow is really running Fromville or just working for whoever is. So, quick pause before I get into it. If you've made it this far, you clearly like taking these shows apart piece by piece, which means you're exactly who this channel's for. Hit subscribe if you want the next one when it drops. Anyway, the town closes that hole. Not with a spell, not with a warning, with wreckage. Furniture, pieces of the house itself dragged in to seal the opening back up, and people die making sure nobody reopens it. Sit with that for a second because it doesn't match how either of our two named entities usually operates. The man in yellow talks. He warns, he cites, he walks away. The boy in white nudges people toward the truth, prophesies, pushes Tabitha off a lighthouse to save her. Neither of them does this. This is blunt, physical, overwhelming. This is a third method entirely, showing up right when the first two rules get broken in the same scene. So who's doing the sealing? Not the man in yellow. Sealing a hole shut doesn't fit a guy who solves problems with a warning over the radio. Not the boy in white either. Nothing about burying people in rubble reads as guidance. Something underneath both of them is doing its own enforcement, with its own methods, and it doesn't ask permission from either entity first. Here's what makes this theory hold up instead of just being a fun read. Both of the entities we already know about act like they're aware of it too. Go back to how the man in yellow talks about consequences. He doesn't threaten Jim with what he personally will do. He warns him about what happens if the rule gets broken, like he's reporting on a system rather than running one. And then there's the boy in white, the one character in this show who's supposed to know more than everyone else, who prophesied Tabitha's arrival before she'd even set foot in Fromville. Even he talks about things shifting beyond what he knows and what he controls, not what he's causing, what's changing around him. That's two entities, opposite sides of the entire show's mythology, both talking like they're inside a system instead of running one. If the man in yellow and the boy in white are really two gods fighting over Fromville, neither of them should sound uncertain about the rules. They both do, which means yellow and white aren't the top of this food chain. They're the two most visible players on a board that belongs to someone or something else. So if there's a third authority, the next question is obvious. What does it actually enforce and who else is scared of it? And this is where the show's own creatures give the game away. Every resident who's ever explained the rules says some version of the same thing. Don't let a creature in, keep the talisman up, don't go outside at night. Standard survival stuff. But flip it around to the creature's side again. Smiley doesn't test a talismaned door to see if it's really warded. He doesn't push on it. He avoids it completely the same way you'd avoid a place you knew you weren't allowed, not a place you physically couldn't reach. That's not caution around a barrier, that's fear of getting caught. And here's the part that actually unsettles me. Nobody in this show, human or creature, can tell you what the punishment looks like if that rule gets broken. Not Boyd, not Victor, who's been there longer than almost anyone. Not even the creatures themselves seem to know exactly what happens, just that something does. A monster that's afraid of an unnamed punishment isn't answering to the man in yellow. It's answering to whatever built the game the man in yellow is also playing. And that brings me to Fatima, because I think her storyline is where this theory stops being a fun read and starts being where Season 5 is actually headed. Season 4 gives us the clinic attack. The earthquake knocks the talisman loose, Smiley gets inside, and when he finally corners Fatima, he calls her Mother. Not a threat, not the usual kill line. Mother, which means whatever Fatima carried, whatever came out of that pregnancy, has some kind of claim on her that the show hasn't spelled out yet. So ask the question nobody's asking. Does the town's rulebook still see Fatima the same way it sees Jim or Boyd or anyone else who's just human? If a talisman goes up and it doesn't fully protect her the way it protects everyone else in that room, that's not a plot hole. That's the town updating her file. Because if the rules can reclassify a person mid-series, that's not a detail. That's the entire operating system of this show laid bare. It's not really about which side wins between yellow and white. It's about what the town decides you are, and what happens once it's decided. 4 seasons in, we've spent all our energy picking a side in a fight that might not even be the real fight. The actual story might be smaller and colder than good entity versus evil entity. It might just be a town with a rule book nobody's ever seen, enforcing itself on everyone inside it, human and monster alike, with 2 very old, very powerful pieces still convinced they're the ones in charge. Season 5 is already filming. So, when it drops, are you watching for the war between yellow and white? Or are you watching for the moment the actual rulebook shows itself?